So first of all, who am I? I'm Jim Killock. I'm Executive Director of the Open Rights Group. I've been working with ORG for 3 years on campaigns, including our campaign on the Digital Economy Act against a company called Form who wanted to do surveillance of internet users at BT through intercepting their traffic. Before that, I was working at the Green Party, and before that, I worked in web design using open technologies. The Open Rights Group. The Open Rights Group, this is what we say about ourselves. We exist to preserve and promote your rights in the digital age. We aim to be the UK's leading voice defending freedom of expression, privacy, innovation, creativity and consumer rights on the net. So obviously freedom and security in this area is of paramount concern to us. Org is a citizen-led organisation. We were formed in 2005, inspired by the Electronic Frontier Foundation. At OpenTech, there was a talk which resulted in a UK-wide pledge. 1,000 people said they'd pay £5 a month to get this organisation going. About 600 did so. Leading lights in that formation, Cory Doctorow was a big figure in getting those people signed up and helping the organisation get started, as was Danny O'Brien, both of whom are people who've worked at Electronic Frontier Foundation, so they very much knew the sort of model of what was needed in the UK and Europe. By now we have 1,400 paying supporters. We have support from foundations like OSI, SRT. About 32,000 people in the UK work with us through email campaigns. We're starting local groups in various areas, and we have about 4 full-time equivalent staff. So we've grown quite a bit in the 5 years. There's a lot to go though. There's a lot actually to be working on. Since 2005, main things we've been working on, things like copyright reform, term extension of copyright. We've fought that very hard. Form I've mentioned. We campaigned against e-voting because of the security and problems with anonymity and the possibilities of fraud around e-voting, as well as the expense, and against the Digital Economy Act, which many of you may be familiar with, is about sending letters attempting to get people to stop infringing copyright on very limited evidence without being able to pinpoint exactly who really is guilty of infringement. So what do we do? All the usual campaigning sort of things. We work with journalists, Parliament, we do reports and put evidence to committees, and we engage with grassroots people. We do online campaigns and say forming local groups, and we run a conference every year called OrgCon, which I very much would like to see people here at. It's a very good event, it's one you should consider coming to. So we work in this field. We call our work digital rights work. That's what we think of as we sort of defend people's rights. We think of them as digital rights. This is because we think digital technologies are a big battleground, if you like, for modern freedoms. On the one hand, we have a very set of really positive aspects in digital technology. There's a proliferation of data and processing power, which for many of us is a good thing. The power to create and disseminate information is in the hands of the many rather than the few. We are all publishers and creators. But of course there is a downside to this. There is an illusion of control, if you like, from companies. They believe that they can use digital technology to actually restrict what you do and to police your activities. And there's also a desire, I think, on behalf of governments to create a panopticon out of the internet, to basically use digital technology as mass surveillance all the time. And that also applies, of course, to companies. So this set of digital rights, I think, it's worth thinking, about this in terms of quite traditional human rights concepts. And the reason I say that is because, firstly, human rights is a concept that has a legal framework. It exists. We can point to it. There are institutions that support human rights, and there are even human rights courts. So there are in this way, if we look at these digital conflicts as they arise through this sort of human rights framework, we can actually start to provide some defence for the things that governments want to do, or companies even, that are bad. The principles, I say this because the principles are the same. They've proved surprisingly robust in this sort of defence of individuals against the state. But there are perhaps more problems with companies, because companies are not, at least in Europe, directly sort of affected by human rights law. Human rights law applies to what governments do with law rather than what corporations do. Interestingly, and I didn't know this until quite recently, that isn't the case in Latin America, because in Latin America, companies have for years been used as an arm of the state. So when there were military militias, they would often be employed by banana corporations. So it became quite evident when banana corporations were essentially directly assaulting civilians that they needed human rights to be applicable to them too. So in Latin America, there's a very different view on whether human rights applies directly to corporations. So what freedoms are we defending then? What are these freedoms or human rights that we are particularly concentrating on? Free speech is the obvious first one. Free speech is obviously it's hugely enhanced by the net, but it's also restricted by things like copyright. Copyright is used to pull down things which are just purely critical often of the copyright works, sometime, or the corporations that own the material. There are questions around defamation, as David Allen Green was talking about, and there are big problems around blocking and filtering of content. Your mobile phones, for instance, are routinely filtered for what is supposedly adult material, and that actually causes free speech problems for many, many groups, particularly ones with forums or web chats, because this is regarded as things where, actually simply that paedophiles might hang out on these chat forums, and therefore they should be blocked for children. It doesn't apply to Facebook, of course, but if you're a small web forum, it does. So free speech is a key battleground for us. Privacy. Both the states and corporate organisations wish to use information essentially for surveillance purposes, another key battleground. The right to organise, again, one we talk about a little bit less, but I think a key one actually, because it's one of the key benefits of the net, but it's also under threat if you have excessive state surveillance. The right to organise is reduced. It's also sometimes under attack when organisations get their sort of facilities pulled in various ways, pages deleted from Facebook, or servers seized or whatever. And as Ross was sort of indicating, there's also this question around personal security, because security isn't just the security of the state. The state doesn't have a monopoly on deciding how you're secure. You have a right to lock your door. You have a right to have windows in your house. So the same applies actually to your digital existence, but actually your personal security, and as last speaker was outlining, your personal security is in some ways can be regarded as in opposition to the state's security. So that again is under threat, not least by surveillance laws. And another one, the very, very key one for us, due process. Legal processes are not a given. Not every single abuse of law gets to a court, and the governments, I think, right now, they tend to think there's so much stuff happening on the internet, whether it's lots and lots of acts of copyright infringement, or whether it's people saying things that people don't like. There's a temptation for governments to say, we don't want to deal with this in a proper judicial way. We want all this sorted out by companies. So you do it. We'll call that self-governance, or sort of self-regulation. You sort the problems out. Doesn't really matter whether this affects people's legal rights or not. You just do it because it's cheaper. Due process also, I think, threatened by a lack of expertise when governments start thinking about these problems. They don't necessarily really understand quite what is going on with digital technology as well. Another one, access to culture. Access to culture is an important right for us. It is referenced in human rights as well, but it's something that is routinely restricted. Our access to our historic culture, if you like, can be very much limited. And the reason I put Elvis Presley up here is because he's out of copyright in the UK, his recordings, but they're in copyright in the States. And when recordings are in copyright, it's harder for them to get distributed. And you know, Elvis Presley's contemporaries and the sort of Beatles and their contemporaries in the 60s, a lot of that stuff ends up out of print and inaccessible to us. It doesn't mean that we you know, shouldn't really have a right to that. You know, we should be able to access this sort of culture. So copyright is sometimes used, particularly in very long, when it's very, very long term of copyright. It restricts our access to popular culture, particularly things, you know, even whose rights, who it is that has rights to this stuff is restricted. And why is that? Well, actually it's because there's often quite a close link, I think, between performers and politicians. You know, politicians, they tend to listen to artists because they are great credibility, and no doubt it was for, you know, great credibility for Richard Nixon to be seen with Elvis Presley, and unfortunately that is how politicians to this day view artists, and they tend to therefore be excessively sympathetic to claims to extend term, as we recently saw in Europe. So what are the key battlegrounds that org is involved in right now? Just ask how long have I got? The key battlegrounds that org is involved in right now. We've heard quite a lot about the first one, Communications Data Bill, often known as the Snoopers Charter. We heard Ross has, I think, gone into a lot of the basic questions here. The Communications Data Bill is about sucking up new sources of information and compiling them and being able to use them. It builds on British principles of, I say principles, of British bad practice in creating regimes of data retention. So things like your phone records already retained for longer than is needed for business purposes. Communications Bill is trying to extend that idea further so that it becomes necessary for companies to collect and retain new data sets. The big problem we have right now with this bill is that nobody really knows what it's for. The Home Office have published a draft bill, that is to say legal language with legal powers, which indicate a programme. They sort of give an idea of what might be done. It says we can require people to collect data, we can require these data sets to be kept for various lengths of time. We can ask anybody more or less who's involved in communication to do this. But that's an extremely wide power. It doesn't really tell you who it is that they're really after. It doesn't tell you whether that's internet service providers or foreign companies like Google. It could be any number of schemes, and that, rhetorically, that gives the Home Office a lot of blag room. They can just sort of more or less say, well, look, these people complaining about this massive data retention and powers, they're wrong. We don't intend that at all. We're just talking about small things on the edge. They haven't published their proposals. So we can't really say. The way this works normally, and the way it should work, the way it worked under Labour, who had a dreadful scheme, the Internet Intercept Modernisation Programme, they published what they intended to do. They said, we're going to have a massive big database, and we're going to collect everybody's internet traffic from every service, and we're going to record who's talking to who, and it's going to cost this, £10 billion or whatever it was, and we're going to give access in this sort of way. That's what they did. Everyone said that's outrageous. We were able to see, and we knew exactly how outrageous it was. It meant that companies were able to explain the problems. This time round, because we just have this bill, we have, frankly, lots of companies not wanting to say anything in public because they don't really know what's proposed. Similarly, we have problems trying to tell people exactly what really is intended. I mean, of course, we do know pretty much because it's the same people pushing this now as it was under Labour. But you know, that isn't necessarily entirely credible when you're being told something very, very different. You know, if you're a minister or if you're a parliamentarian is being told something very, very different by the same Home Office officials, you know, us pointing out that it probably is the same thing doesn't necessarily sound quite so credible. So the key thing with this is public opinion, I think, because public opinion is what is going to persuade MPs that this is an issue that they must deal with. So I really urge you to get involved in those campaigns and talk to your MPs, do things locally, do whatever you can. Other battles we're involved in at the moment, copyright enforcement. Jeremy Hunt, who may not be Secretary of State for Culture for too much longer, he is very pro-copyright enforcement. He's been pushing the Digital Economy Act along. We're concerned with this not because we think copyright shouldn't be enforced, but because if you put these duties on the wrong people or in the wrong way, then either innocent people get trapped in it, or you cause huge business burdens, or you cause damage to innovation. Because copyright applies to more or less everything. You know, even tweets, potentially, headlines, you name it, copyright can apply to it. And that can be a huge barrier and problem for people. Data protection, you're going to hear a lot about this, I think, over the next couple of years. You may have already heard about things like the right to be forgotten, but Europe and Viviane Reding in Europe is pushing reform of data protection. This is a good thing. Data protection is one of the key rights we have over the way that data is used, and it's therefore very important that we get good rights for end users. You know, the right to get your information back, the right to have it deleted from companies when they cease to need it and when you don't want to have a relationship with them. Of course, those are potentially costs to businesses, and they don't necessarily want you to have that sort of flexibility and rights. But it's very important that we support Viviane Reding, I think, in her attempts to reform data protection for the better, not least because it doesn't work very well in the UK, and the proposals coming from Europe will probably strengthen the regime in the UK a great deal. Then we have Claire Perry's proposal for default pornography blocking. This is being pushed right now, and is at the Department for Education. They have a consultation about this. It's called active choice. The idea is that you will all, in the future, have to tell your internet service provider that yes, you do want pornography switched on. Right, okay, so the idea is that by sort of saying this to you, most of you go, I don't want porn. What are you talking about? And not even less do I want to tell my internet service provider that I want porn. So you will not say I want porn. So then a whole category of content is then blocked. Is that just pornography? Very unlikely. If an internet service provider is asked to police content for 18-year-old people and under, or people under 18, they will block bars and pubs. They will block chat sites that might have adults talking to minors. They will block gambling sites. Anything that might have hate speech. All of these things will be blocked. So, and this is, as I say, happens on mobile now. It's pretty offensive. Political sites, joke sites, all kinds of things get blocked. It will not just be simply pornography. And of course, some sites look like pornography when they're not. We've had that happen with sites advertising churches, for instance, because they mention sex. Lastly, the last big battleground, a more positive one, is the questions around open data, open standards and government procurement. On open data, the government has been particularly ambitious. It hasn't managed to realise all of its ambitions on open data, but Francis Maud here has been pushing quite hard to get the government to open up data. And I believe this is a key digital battleground, because not just because it's nice for us to have data, but because it's about government accountability and transparency. And when corporations and other people are gathering up huge amounts of information and have access to lots and lots of information, we need information too. So government data is one of those things which can help rebalance power for citizens. So it's not, I think, just about some nice maps and maybe good railway timetables or whatever. It, I think, is actually about a citizen-state relationship, and very important for that. So lastly, if you want to work on any of these issues, if you are keen on defending your digital freedoms, whether it's privacy, whether it's free speech, whether it's advancing open data, please do join Open Rights Group, get involved with our campaigns and our local groups. Thank you very much.